Um, while we're waiting, we are here this morning to talk about Europe's competitiveness, the innovation that we're seeing in Europe, and I'd like to paint a positive picture of all the progress that's been made, but we're also going to talk about some of the challenges ahead. Let me start by introducing quickly our panelists. We are honored to have Neelie Kroes, who was the European Union's competition commissioner. She oversaw the case against Microsoft. She became a vice president of the European Commission, and then she headed up the European Digital Agenda. These days, she's busy building Startup Delta in the Netherlands, encouraging or promoting the Netherlands as a digital startup hub. Welcome, Neelie. Right next to me, we have F.Talpes, who is CEO and co-founder of Bitdefender. For those of you who don't know the company, it's a Bucharest headquartered antivirus and security software company that has 500 million users around the world, is present in 100 companies, and is well on its way to becoming a unicorn still based and headquartered out of Eastern Europe. Next to Neelie, we have K.Speck, who is founder of Digital Marketing Expert, based in Karlsruhe, Germany, and she is in fact a digital marketing expert and an expert in e-commerce, and she works very closely with startups. And last but certainly not least, we have N.Kolev from Deloitte. He is the co-founder and managing director of Deloitte Digital. And he also was vice president of Moneybookers, now known as Skrill, and helped build that into a global company that was eventually sold for $1.1 billion. So we have a really interesting panel of experts, and I hope we're going to get into a good discussion, and I encourage participation from the audience. Just very quickly, highlighting some of the progress here in Europe. Today, entrepreneurship has become an accepted career choice. 62% of new startups in Europe are being created by serial entrepreneurs. We have a number of success stories, global success stories coming out of Europe now, companies like Criteo, Adyen out of the Netherlands, BlaBlaCar out of France. We have a growing group of world-class developers. It is cheaper to build startups in Europe. The cost is 1.5 times higher in San Francisco. In 2015, $10 billion worth of capital was raised in Europe for European companies. We have a lot of new early-stage funds. We have new institutional VC funds being created here. Rocket Internet here in Germany is now one of the top 10 internet companies worldwide. We have a swelling group of unicorns that are being created here in Europe. Now, all of that said, we still have issues of scale and speed. VCs from the US raised 5.4 times more capital than their European counterparts. And although we've built 35 unicorns here in Europe since 2003, during the same period, the US built 125 and China built 52. And we will hear later today here at DLD about Startup India, a new initiative from the Indian government where they have decided very quickly to allow entrepreneurs to create new companies through a mobile app within hours, if not minutes, do away with capital gains tax, and do a whole lot of other things to make creating and growing a company much easier and faster. So we have to move more quickly in Europe, and we do have some challenges. So let me now turn to the panelists and talk about, first, the positive news, how we're building companies from world-beating companies from Europe, and how Europe is succeeding in building digital hubs, not just in London or Berlin, but in all different places in Europe. So, Neelie, let me start with you with Startup Delta.
Would you mind, Jennifer, when I just add one line to your remark that startup picking out for a career is now accepted? It's far more than that at the moment. In Europe, and talking about the Netherlands being responsible for Startup Delta in the Netherlands, it is cool, it's attractive. The younger generation is not that longer interested in a career with multinationals or with governments or whatever. They are preferring to start their own business, and that is a complete change.
Absolutely, absolutely. So can you just give us a couple headlines about Startup Delta?
Well, the Dutch government asked me after my filling in the 2 terms in Brussels to be the special envoy for the startup scene. And what we have in mind, and we are quite successful, and I cross my fingers. I accepted the job for 1.5 years. We are on 2/3 of the route, so to say. And what we have in mind is being in the ranking for Europe in the top 3. And we are there already. So we are London, Berlin, Amsterdam. And Amsterdam is not only the city, but small country. It is Amsterdam plus. That's one. Number 2, we are absolutely pushing the innovation and research part, because it's very important for those startups, so that also universities, research institutes, and the startup scene, together with the corporates, are cooperating. And that is going on. Getting venture capital interested in the Netherlands, that's also on the move. So far, so good. But it is all about talent. And there I want to plea for a European startup visa. And the Dutch have the presidency of the European Commission this first part of 2016. We are lining up in just getting a startup visa, a European startup visa, and it is for founders of startups from outside Europe. It is remarkably important that it is not only a one-way traffic, that European startups are going to, for example, the US, West or East Coast, because it's easier, so to say, to get the eye of venture capital people. With that visa, it would be possible to get those founders also interested in starting their business. And you start in one member state, but after a couple of months and proving that you are financially independent and that you have your insurance and so on, you can just roll it out to other countries too. And then, of course, it is our crown jewel, the digital single market, Europe without borders. And we have a couple of hurdles at the moment, but don't let them just predict what is possible. For with the startup scene, it should be possible to have that single digital market in your hands. And those founders outside Europe, from Canada, US, but also the Far East, South America, are highly interested. And that is just motivating our own startups too. And I'm certain that you will agree.
Well, Florin, tell us, how might this startup visa project help attract more talent, especially top level, business management talent to Europe? Because that's something that we're still missing here.
Yeah, should the outline something here. So I'm very interested about the topic of scaling up, okay? So you're an early stage, and once you're breaking that barrier of early stage, you need to scale up, okay? So when you're going to scale up, and there is about sales, marketing, it's about doing business, so it's about going regionally or going globally. If you are a high-tech company, probably you'll go, and the innovation-based, you have to go globally, finally. So it's about the barriers you're facing in doing that, okay? So we all know that, let's say, in terms of technical skills, so talents, there is a global shortage. So that's happening everywhere, in fact. But when you talk about, let's say, scaling up companies, so going regionally or globally, I'm talking especially about the high-tech companies, the number one barrier, in my opinion, is the business skills, in fact. Because let's say when you have a chance to get funding, could be an investment or organic, something like that, a large part of the funding is used in expanding. And when you are expanding generally in mature markets, very, very competitive markets. Could be US, could be Western Europe, could be Japan. I just giving some examples. And in those markets, you are facing a very competitive landscape. That means when you are competing with in those markets, you talk about business skills which are at a very high level. So you need that kind of competitiveness, that kind of talents, quality to succeed in those markets, okay? And that's why I'm saying that in Europe, and when I'm talking about Europe, it's difficult to talk about one Europe, but more you go from London to Eastern, less you find the business.
Why is it difficult?
Why, you know, even as a market, as a company, when I'm targeting US is one large market, when I'm targeting Europe, today I'm not thinking about what we think, what we design, what we want to build. I'm targeting several markets. Could be in size, added sizes, the same, okay? But I'm targeting, by example, I'm looking for Germany, which has a different culture in terms of behavior, like a buyer, okay? I'm talking about UK, where is a different behavior and so on, okay? So it's, but look, we should face that reality that Europe is diverse. And that, I think, is not a blocking point, but it's an advantage Europe has, that kind of diversity, okay? And mixing these kind of DNAs together, you could build something really, really exceptional there.
Talking about mixing DNA, I'm going to jump over to you, Nikki. So, you know, one of the things that has traditionally held Europe back is that there was not enough collaboration or business being done between large corporates and traditional companies and startups. We don't have the equivalent of the Small Business Act here. Big companies have not traditionally bought from startups. They don't buy the startup companies, and they have difficulty figuring out the right way to work with them. But that's starting to change, right? So
I think it is. I think it really is starting to change, and we shouldn't. I mean, we're on a learning curve, right? So we shouldn't be always too defensive and say what didn't work in the past, but actually looking what starts to work right now and looking forward and saying that's actually a success case. So there will be more coming out of it. I mean, corporates did have learnings that M&A doesn't always really work well because they buy an asset when it's been produced and it's been sold to them. Yeah, you first date before you get married. So what is happening right now is that corporates start to understand that this business building, that's what we emphasize so much, is what used to be building your product and building your service is nowadays building your business. You have to continuously reimagine how does your business incrementally, if not disruptive yet, but incrementally evolve. What is the business that you need to build in order to stay in business? And I think what Neelie just mentioned is a great initiative for the entrepreneur's visa, because we talk a lot in the last, let's say, at least 24 months about ecosystems. Now, what is an ecosystem? The attempt of almost everyone building an accelerator, you might say that is an attempt to create an ecosystem. But even more than that, the ecosystem is this diverse Europe. We're sitting now in Munich. We have just across the street the largest insurance company in the world. opposite the street, the largest reinsurance company in the world. We have one of the most successful automakers here. So and the list goes on. And that is the ecosystem. That is the platform that entrepreneurs coming, be it from Europe or from the outside of Europe, anyone welcome, basically welcome to jump on and build businesses together and for those corporates. And I think that is a tweak, that is the change that is happening right now, because that's an asset. Yeah, I mean, we just spoke in the pre-discussion when entrepreneurs build successful companies and they're worth 50, 100 million. That's great for the single entrepreneur, but it's not going to move the needle for a 70 billion company. So we need to leverage the existing assets of large corporations and help them build their incremental business.
How do we pull that all together?
Just combining those two remarks of my colleagues. We started last November in the Netherlands a program in which corporates together with startups are united in their efforts to approach that diverse market. 20 big corporates are sitting at the table and are willing and are interested, and the startups are willing and interested too. That type of program, and indeed markets and the knowledge about markets and the knowledge that corporates have, and talking about marketing, sales, but also the legal part, so to say, is extremely important for startups. By the way, it's a two-way traffic for the startups. Do have that innovative way of thinking out of the box and not like silos and so on. And so far, it's a big success, the 20 plus the startups. And I think that that would be extremely important to roll out that type of programs all over Europe, for we can learn from each other. And then it is making sense that with the knowledge that you have already, and with your innovative way of thinking you have already, that you are inspiring the other one.
Katja, just if I can just bring her in. Katja, what are you seeing? Where are we on that continuum of, of more collaboration between large companies and startups? Is it still more about marketing and, hey, I have opened an accelerator, or is it becoming, in your view, deeper and more strategic?
I think it's the very beginning of, we are at the beginning. So we are not... We started talking and we are getting there. So some of the large corporates founded their innovation labs. They founded their external startups, which is, from my perspective, a great start to get that done. Because if you want to build new business, usually you have your, the old days you had your business development team. So the world is changing so fast that you can't do it in a large enterprise anymore, especially when you're not from the digital space and you want to move into that area. So if you have an external hub, like an external startup or innovation lab, you can move much more faster. You can bring in the talents that know how to work in that and to have this startup attitude, the entrepreneurship, which is, of course, in a large corporate, you just need different responsibilities. So you don't need this kind of the way a startup or a small or medium-sized company works. So I think there is still a long way to go, because I see as well initiatives like there is a lot of, the chief digital officer probably did not exist a couple of years ago. We see a lot of that going on now. But in some companies, I observe that they install this position, just that it's installed, which is not moving anything forward. So,
Nikki, you wanted to jump in.
No, I just wanted to first of all, the positive thing is that the C in Chief Digital Officer already commits, because that's a C-level discussion. And that is something we need to acknowledge if you want to talk about digital business and transforming and building your incremental business. If that's not happening with the commitment of the CEO and the supervisory board, it's not going to happen, because from bottom up, it's not going to come. There's too much of a risk. But what I really liked about the example of those European innovation hubs, and that, by the way, underlines we do take an active approach. you know, because we're very often as Europeans perceived as someone who would like to put some boundaries and like to restrict and this and stop this and don't do that. That's actually not the case. We start to get into an age where we are the use case. We have all the business, the large corporations are here. So if you see how much data, I mean, emphasis and customization are the two big words that are now yesterday and today here. The data and the information exchange between corporations and between machines, not in 2020, already today, exceeds significantly the amount of data exchange between consumers. That's our use case. Yeah? And that is the companies like the one that Florian builds in cyber, B2B is the use case. So I'm actually very positive about what is going on right now and about the learnings that we're generating, but we should also give ourselves the time that it requires. It does take time to build a unicorn. I mean, Facebook is almost a teenager. They're celebrating 12 years. So it doesn't work without capital, and without time, you're not going to build a unicorn. But the capital, and that's probably I can throw that still in, we are asking very often politics to support funding. I think we have a lot of funding in the corporations if we do the business building exercise, because then the corporation know they're putting the money into creating their own business. So if politics creates basically the stage, and then entrepreneurs get funded by corporations so that they build the business for them, they will have a great exit. Corporations have a great business because it's been done, tailor-made, customized for them, and then we're all happy. Yeah?
Can I jump in here? Because I agree, but you know, it's still a lot harder to get access to funding in Germany than, for example, in the US or other countries.
Much more.
And there, I mean, just looking at the numbers, there is a lot less VC capital outside. I was just yesterday talking with one of the participants. They have a company, you know, it's not a startup. The 60 people working there, they are selling to Salesforce and to SAP. So I think what they provide is proven. They have a huge hassle to get new investment on board.
And scale-ups, by the way, what you're mentioning, that is the thing that we also need to much more and foster and much more strengthen in Europe, because it's, and you're totally right, I mean, the growth capital is something we are desperately lacking. But all I'm saying is, if in the way we've done it before, startups go to VCs and pitch for growth capital, that's obviously not happening. So let's not figure out why it's not happening, let's figure out how it can happen, and that is why I'm saying, let's bring entrepreneurs together with large corporates, and the large corporates do have the growth capital also to follow through, because they're supporting their own interest, and then we're creating the ecosystem that we all want to see in Europe. Yeah?
Neelie, you can just say something.
I'm so happy that you mentioned, both of you, the scale-ups. For the startups, in my opinion, anyhow, talking about the Netherlands and talking about capital, that's not a real problem. You always have an aunt or an uncle or whatever, and you are talking about small amounts compared to. But, and then I'm just returning to your remark, in the third or fourth round, then it is making really a big fight, so to say. And that is what I'm inspired, that we shouldn't allow in Europe, that because there is no possibility, opportunity for that third, fourth round to get your money, that you are forced to go to the US or whatever. For then, in my opinion, it's not the natural way of doing and creating your business. So I think that government should be aware, and then you're talking about fiscal systems, that those, for example, who are interested in investing in startups, scale-ups, that they are treated in a special way, and not like the normal way we were used to. For then, it is not stimulating when you are selling your startup or your scale-up, and then the fiscus is knocking on your door and asking for 100%, so to say. So that is quite important. But if you allow me, Jennifer, we are talking about startups and scale-ups and the ecosystem. for me, the startup theme is fantastic for a society and is fantastic for Europe, and we have so much talent. But we still have governments all over the place, all over Europe anyhow, who are lacking behind in what we were used to. Risk avoiding, we did it like we do, there are so many troubles, so don't burden us with new challenges. And they have to know that it is a global scene. It is not only your nation, your membership of the European Union, it is a global scene. Competitive like hell and fascinating. So also governments should be attacked by startups and saying, come on, come to this part of the world, also in the new era of startup and scale-ups.
Yeah, I wanted to add something. So looking to the M&A activity, for example, looking to the startups, one phenomenon we see in some parts of Europe, it's once you get an investment, also the companies moved from that country to a different country. And what we see as a phenomenon is a move. London is a kind of honeypot there, and US. So, and what's happening there is I'm once again focusing on the business skills shortage. Because generally they take the team, and when I'm saying take the teams, they are taking part of the teams, like the technical leaders, okay? They are keeping the technical teams in those countries, and they are adding the business layer. Mm-hmm. The business layer they are adding in UK or in US, and US is the preferred target for that. So once again, I have the background that we have to build those business skills to, let's say, break down this kind of phenomenon. And secondly, because you mentioned about mixing corporations and startups for learning, transferring knowledge, it's essential for the high-tech startups to get knowledge from the headquarters. There is a big difference in terms of business knowledge when you talk about the headquarters and the subsidiaries. Because the startups are headquarters. They are thinking globally in completely different ways than a subsidiary. So for large parts of Europe, you find a lot of subsidiaries of big corporations. You don't find headquarters. And we have to do something to somehow make cooperate the startups with the headquarters. And I should say something here. In what we see in the United States, by example, we see a lot of executives, very strong executives, which are very knowledgeable in fast growth, high tech, and so on, which are keen to provide advice. One way to transfer, to get the knowledge, is to get advisors. Just give a few shares for free, let's say, but for advice, in fact, because you don't pay the advisor, and you could get the best advice in terms of business development.
But I guess just if I may hop into that, the business skills, the business layer, if you want to sharpen that, I guess, is business development, what we're lacking in Europe. Because we simply lack the skill of saying, I mean, we see that very often on stage. If you have a US startup and you have a European startup, the US startup doesn't have a product yet, so both don't have a product yet, don't have actually anything. The US startup tells you it's a $1 billion market, we're going to make a unicorn within 12 months, and if you're not on board, you're lost. That's a US startup. The European startup tells you, you know, we think it might be a $1 billion market, but we're not sure yet, so don't nail us down on that. It might be really, it's going well for us already, but we might become a unicorn, most likely we won't. And then you're like, man, why? So the business development skills and also the way of not overselling, but presenting ourselves
Marketing.
with a certain attitude,
confidence
of can do and will do is lacking.
I couldn't agree more, but the background of that behaving of the European ones is also that the successful ones, the unicorns or nearby to be a unicorn, are very modest. Mm-hmm. They don't want a lot of publicity. Yes. They don't want, in a way that people are asking, come on,
True.
But be normal, so to
True.
say. And that we have to change. So what I'm doing constantly is addressing those. It is your your duty to expose what you did, and that now and then it's failure. Now and then it is really blood, sweat, no tears, hopefully, but and still you can make it. But people need just examples where you are excellent ones. So in Europe there are so many excellent examples, but don't be modest and just come out and tell your story. We do have those people too.
Yeah, Florian.
Yeah, I should say that there are some differences in terms of culture, and I should outline some of them. We Europeans have a culture of research and development. So when you talk about, let's say, that kind of mindset, Americans thinking of becoming unicorns and marketing, it's also about focusing here, a matter of focus and prioritization. Because in Europe, generally, when you start something, a technology to design and create a technology, we don't think that marketing, it should be done during the first steps, should be design. We think that marketing is coming after
the end.
We develop the product. And that's a difference, a big difference. Because the Americans do think that once you are designing the product, you have to think to marketing. And when I'm talking about business development, I'm thinking about something very simple like product management. In product management, you have to understand the market, the needs. How do you fit those needs? This is also overlapping with the marketing side. So you have to think and design the marketing in the initial stage. That's why I'm saying you have to have the right ingredients when you are starting up, because it's not only about technicals, R&D, it's also about business. So start to design that from the very first moment.
Yeah. And to add, I mean, we are designing a service or product to sell it to a customer. It's either a consumer or a B2B. So once we start designing it, it's the marketing thinking is to think like the customer, to put the design and the development in the right way, to really have the right service and product for your customer ready, instead of being in your little room and designing until it's ready and then throw it on the market. And maybe it's not what the market wants.
Jennifer, Israel is doing a great job in this field with their system of a chief economist, and not that close to the government, but with a great opportunity to stimulate research and innovation. And then you are attracting with those budgets, and you are not taking the risk what's taken quite often as a direction in Europe, that when you have to slim off because the economy is going down or whatever, just to cut research budgets. And that is the opposite, for we need the research and innovation budgets. But it is, of course, easier for your potential voter to say, oh, we cut a little bit and you can still keep your social welfare and so on. And that is impressing in Israel with that system, just a bit of independence for the chief economist with the budget. Everybody knows what is at stake and everybody can act like that.
I think that's a really key point, and it's something that I wanted to ask you and the other panelists, because yesterday when we had the panel about Europe, I know that a lot of the Americans in the audience were saying, oh yeah, those Europeans, they're obsessed about privacy, about blocking Google, about blocking competition, and government should just get out of the way. Well, when you look at the history of the technology industry in Europe, we were lucky that back in, I guess it was the 70s, somebody stood back, the policymakers stood back and said, chips are going to be the key to the future. Europe has to have a global play. And so the French and the Italian governments, got together and they had their chip companies merge, and they created a top 10 global player, which was crucial for the future of Europe. Then, the same thing happened in the aerospace industry and the mobile industry. We had GSM, the US, their free market. It was a mess because they didn't come together on a standard. So there is a role for policy to play. We don't want too much government interference, but there is this role. So what should be the role of policymakers going forward? What are the key strategic things that Europe should be focusing on? We have B2B strengths. We have, as you mentioned, some of the world's biggest companies. We have a huge manufacturing base here. The next technology revolution is all going to be about the future of factories. How do we leverage those strengths, and what do the policymakers need to do to make sure that that important collaboration between the big companies and the startups and government takes place to Europe's advantage?
It is asking for politicians with courage, that number one. Adding to that and adding to your list what is proving that is making a big difference, Airbus wouldn't be existing if at that time a couple of leaders in Europe didn't have taken that decision. And taken the decision, there should be a budget and from the different countries, and on distance it is business-like research, innovation, and of course producing the plane, so to say. Now Airbus is beating Boeing, and it is without subsidy, so it's working. CERN is another one. So it is talking about the courage to invest in research and innovation, and especially talking about fundamental research. Having said that, and that makes a lot of sense, then you should take into account that, of course, a government shouldn't be a hurdle or a barrier, but should use the digital single market. For that was, in my opinion, the best decision the founders of the European Union could take at that time, after World War II, and it's still there, and thanks heaven, and let's keep it, for it's our crown jewel, so to say. So politicians should be aware that there is a function for them, but don't be involved in the daily business, and don't take the easy way to cut off those budgets, for it's extremely important, and there you can learn from the startups and the scale-ups, and the government should do so.
I wanted to also get to some of the early examples we have of strong collaboration between technology companies and traditional companies. Now, the car manufacturers in Germany are worried because if Google is developing autonomous cars, this is going to have an impact on their business. They risk becoming a commodity, but they're fighting back, and they bought Nokia's business, and they're starting to create an ecosystem. Can you?
Yeah, which I think is a great example of a use case where heavy competitors, are basically creating a joint data-driven platform. And I mean, couldn't agree more with what Neelie is saying, that the role of, the different stakeholders, if you take society, scale-ups, and corporates as business, and politics, I guess the role that we would expect is, first of all, a European role. So it is a Brussels role. And I guess each of the member states needs to buy into the idea of a single digital market means that we really need to represent ourselves as a single market, because only then we have the potential of being the wealthiest, healthiest, most attractive market. But then that is a Brussels topic. And the enablement of creating a platform, because when corporates bring in their use case, that is what they bring in. They bring their assets, they bring their capital, they bring their clients. When scale-ups bring their technology, their great ideas, their great will and ambition to create things, then it takes an independent, trustworthy, and secure middleman. And that's, I guess, the role of the European policymakers, to create that common platform where business then can be built and accelerated.
Okay, great. Can I ask if there's any questions from the audience?
Jennifer, may I make if the audience is not reacting on your, I'm sorry to ask again for the floor, and make a naughty remark, but it's always my best.
Okay.
a couple of years ago, 6 years ago, when there was the automotive fell down, US starting, and we didn't take in Europe, the automotive industry didn't take that opportunity to be upfront instead of just being in the same position. If at that time, and we discussed it in Brussels, and we had meetings and so on, the German automotive, the Italian automotive, and the French automotive would have the courage, and more than courage, to make a plan for European automotive industry, we could have beat them. And we didn't. For political reasons, and the unions, and jobs, and so on. And I'm always saying, you are talking about jobs of today, but you are not certain that those jobs will stay. And if you are upfront, then you can make it. And by the way, it's not only the automotive. The same will happen if we are not dealing with the financial sector too. The banking situation and talking about those new startups in the financial technical sector, and impressive. If the banking sector is not awake and not alert to just change their mind, by the way, not only banking but also insurance, that the digital technology is completely changing the scene. And if we are waiting till we are faced with the final result, we are losers. And I don't want to be a loser, for there is so much talent in Europe.
The difficulty, as I'm sure you know, is the companies are all worried about the next quarter results, and the politicians are all worried about getting elected again. And you know, if there are layoffs and if the reorganization that's necessary is a painful process. So what we need is people who are courageous, who have a strategic vision for the future of Europe, and understand that technology and having strong technology strengths is key to the future of Europe. So we need you in Brussels pushing to continue to push. I think there's the European visa will be discussed later this month.
27th of this month in an informal council. So please, if all the startups are knocking the door of their governments, and this is not a huge number. So far, those talented founders, 50 to 100. So it's not a big movement, so to say. And you are really talking about talent that you need in all the sectors that you are mentioning too.
I'm told that we're out of time, so I'd like to ask the audience to give a big round of applause to our panel.